Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. Hope if you're in the New England area that you stayed dry in the last couple days. Welcome into the 27th installment of the Without a Map in My Footsteps podcast live stream. It has to go hand in hand with the podcast that I create weekly. And so, hi, Serpa, you're the first one in. And so, I was off last week, so let's jump into that. So I ended up I've been doing these live streams every week, so 27 weeks in a row. So last week would have been 27. So think about that. That's more than 6 months every week on a Friday night. And I like doing these, but my life, it's a lot of constant content creation. That's a lot of C's. Just in an average week, if you count this live stream, which I have to prepare for because I don't have notes. So it's like I got to think of things to talk about and go in order. And I set up photos for a little display. Then when I get done with it, I upload it to IGTV. I put it on YouTube, which means I have to load it, describe it. I add in timestamps so that if you're watching this after the fact, and this is usually about 45 minutes, I like to divide it into chapters that kind of fit. So that's more work. And basically, hi, Mom. So that's just a live stream. The podcast weekly, I edit and share and mark it. But before that, I have to actually record it. Before that, I have to actually research topics, especially if I'm doing history subjects and things that I need proper times, dates, things like that. I need to get that. So it's a lot of research. That's just the podcast part. On top of that, I do YouTube videos. I try to do not as much as I used to. Hi, Kate. So if you people see this afterwards, I'm saying hi to, so far it's been my stepfather, my mother, and my, I would say oldest sister, but I'm the oldest, so you're second oldest. But the YouTube videos, essentially, hi, Shlee. Now I've got two of my sisters in the chat. But the YouTube videos I have to put together and edit. Right now I'm working on a Race Point Lighthouse one. I'll get into that a little later. But that's a lot of work. I do blog posts where I research a lot of topics, write them out. Writing, to me, it's not that hard. I don't want to, humble brag, I guess. But the writing part of it's not hard. The research part is. So I do those. I'm working on 2 different books. And so all this comes together in that eventually you get burned out. Because I also have a job where I'm a personal trainer 25, 30 hours a week. Well, closer to 25. But so I have to put in work in there to put together workouts that are helpful for the clients I have. Some of them are in-home clients, so I drive to their houses. So it was a lot of stuff. So last week I just was sitting on my couch and I said, I'm tired. I don't want to go live because it wouldn't be good. I would be tired and I would just bitch and complain about all my content. So I wanted to shove it at the beginning of this just so you knew where I was, because it's I've been doing these. It was 26 weeks in a row. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I don't feel like it tonight. But I knew I'd be back this week because I put it in every podcast. Tune into the live stream. So I can't keep saying that. And then if people come to tune in and it's not there. But yeah, so that's where I was last week. I was burned out all to hell. And so I took the week off. So what I did instead was I went out, like I was saying, to Race Point Lighthouse. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Race Point Lighthouse or Race Point in general in Provincetown, if you're not from Cape Cod, then you might not be. The lighthouse itself is the closest you can get to it. It's well over 1.5 miles, closer to 2 miles. And it's a walk through the scrub pine and sand where there's thousands and thousands of mosquitoes. If you ever go out there, you need bug spray or else it's trouble for you. And then you go across a marshy area. Then you walk through the sand dunes to get out to here. I had never been out there for sunset before. I had done a sunrise, probably 4 years ago. My buddy Steve and I went out there in January. I think it was 2017. We walked out there before sunrise. So think about January on Cape Cod before sunrise. And we were exposed to the elements. And the sunrise was amazing. But it took, I think, legit 4 hours to get all the feeling back in my fingertips. Like my hands were frozen. They thawed. And then the tips were like numb. And I said, that's lovely. I'll get frostbite and lose my fingers for some photos that won't make money. But yeah. So I was out there at Race Point Light. That is the topic that'll be within the next few days. It'll be up on YouTube. Basically because I have a lot of 4K video I shot while I was out there. But I don't want to just share video. It has to have some sorts of captions to let the people know if you're not familiar with Race Point. I don't want to just say, here it is, it's nice. It's more like info and stuff to go along with it. So that's coming up. But that's where I was last week. I will tell you, the walk out there was fine. I was soaked in bug spray. I mean, it was just nasty. I was shining because it was just all over me. And so I got out there and did all the photography. And it was one of those, if you're a photographer, if you enjoy sunsets, you know, after the sun goes down, you've got this like 10 to 15 minute window where the colors will start to change. And I said, I don't want to miss that. So I sat out at the lighthouse and all the people were coming off the beach. I said, boy, it might be time for me to start heading back. By the time I started heading back to my car, which I parked at this little sort of secret parking lot, but it's right near the bike trail, it was already dark. I had a flashlight, a nice one, so I could see and get my way back. But I don't know if any of you have ever heard great blue heron, the birds, how they sound when they, whatever their call is, they squawk. But it almost sounds like if a goose was honking and then you just grabbed its neck while it was honking, I guess. You'd have to find it on YouTube or something and play its call. But I'm walking back and it's pitch black dark and I got my flashlight trying not to step on anything or come face to face with a coyote. And off to my side, there's just sounds like people are getting strangled, but it's the herons. I kept scaring them. So that was fun. But that's what I was doing last week, was hiking out to Race Point Light for sunset. But as of yesterday, I did release episode 36 of the podcast, and this one was a pretty fun one. They're all varying degrees of fun. I'd never put together a podcast that I don't like, because then why, if I don't like it, why should you, if that makes sense? So the main gist of it was back to school and kind of my memories of things from my back to school time. So I thought about the 80s. So elementary school, kindergarten through 5th grade, and what it was like. I talk a lot about the different, like I did a clothing, retro clothing brands segment. I think it was episode 4 of the podcast. The funny thing is that I'm trying to pull these from my head. I kind of remember what everything was in each episode. There's a guy who I listen to, a podcaster. He's got over 700 episodes, and he's pretty good at pulling stuff out of the air. Oh, yeah, I talked about that on episode 250, so maybe I'll be like that. But I also talked about Cape Cod's first radio station, which literally lasted like 2 months back in 1926, and it was on a golf course in Osterville. I don't think the golf course doesn't exist anymore. It's basically like they just built houses over it. But it was the Seapuit golf course. I'm bad with directions as far as if you wanted to go check it out, but it's an interesting story about how radio began on the Cape. And so that's a good one. WSGC was what it was for Seapuit Golf Course was SGC. And then I dove into the road trip segment of the podcast. I've been going through the 2019 road trip that I did where I went all across the country and just so much driving, 2,100 miles in 6 days. That's a rough diagram. I keep seeing that in my photo thingy on here on the phone, and I'm like, I should just delete that. And then I'm like, well, wait, maybe I want to show someone that in the future. I'm basically down in the bottom of Pennsylvania in my current episode of the podcast. So what I did was I put this together because it would be good, and I intentionally put a photo because I knew my screen would be over it. So I talk about Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and anyone that knows me or if you've listened to the podcast, I obviously do This Week in History every week. I've dialed it back to where it's a main story each week. Like episode 36 is thoughts about 9/11 20 years later, but that's coming later in this live stream. But Gettysburg was a different animal when it came to road trip. I talked about other stuff around it, but basically the reason I went to Gettysburg was what you see here. The battlefield and the cemetery from the Civil War. I'm a big Civil War fan. I'm fascinated by the history, and that period of time up through the turn of the 20th century is like my favorite. It's my wheelhouse as far as interesting things. And Gettysburg was one of the most famous battles in the Civil War. It lasted 3 days, and it was the bloodiest overall battle, not the bloodiest single day one, which actually it's interesting. That's coming in episode 37 next week, which I didn't know. So to jump ahead to episode 37, there's a town in Maryland. I drove from Gettysburg to this other town, and it was basically I just stayed there. It was like I drove until I'm like, all right, I'm tired. Let's stay in this town. And I had dinner at this local diner, and it was fun. But then I said, I'm going to put them in the road trip segment of the podcast. And that's when I started researching them. It's Hagerstown, Maryland is basically where it was. And when I looked them up, the Battle of Antietam, for anyone who's a Civil War, anyone who has any knowledge of it, that's the single bloodiest one-day battle. And it was right near where I stayed. And I'm like, God, if I had known, I would have gone to that. Because a lot of sites I saw in the middle, it's weird. I went, like my sister Ashley is saying, the Battle of Schrute Farm. I went from seeing the sights of The Office in Scranton, then the next several stops were Civil War centric, and then I went from there to the beginnings of this country with Jamestown and Roanoke, and then I went to the Outer Banks, but that's where I'm going to get to. And so Gettysburg itself, that was on my bucket list. I wanted to go to the battlefield, which is at the top left corner. Interestingly, my camera that I had at the time, because it was chilly on that day, it was November, the camera crapped out on me. So I got a few photos, and then all the rest were with my phone. And then my phone, interestingly, died as well because it got cold. But that was the phone, it was an old phone. So it wasn't like spirits got to it or anything. But if you go to the national park, the Gettysburg Military National Park, you can either drive and do a driving tour around, which, I guess that's easier. But me, I wanted to go to the battlefield, so I walked. And to get from where I parked to that spot on the battlefield was about a mile. And there's a paved trail. It goes through the woods. And on the way out there, it was in the golden hour, they call it, like the hour before sunset. So it was getting to that point, and it was cloudy. You can see I'm walking out there and they have these giant, they were probably 4 feet by 6 feet, black and white poster size photos of soldiers from the Afghan war. But I didn't know that. I'm walking out through the woods and there's just huge faces in the woods. And I'm like, what the hell? Afterwards, I looked up what it was, and it was an art project type thing. And also on the way out, there were a bunch of deer just eating and roaming around. At first, I thought it was squirrels because you could just hear like the crinkling of leaves. And it's like, no, it's a bunch of deer. So I got out to the battlefield, and there's dozens and dozens of monuments for every regiment, all the states, all the different big military heroes from the war. And the bottom two, so that's the sobering thing. If you can see, I chose those 2 photos because a lot of the people who died on that battlefield were just nameless soldiers. So it was literally these sections where it was these little stone squares that represented a body that they were buried, but they had no name. So it would just say, like on the left, it says unknown, 143 bodies. And it's really humbling to stand before it and see them all laid out before you. And then that's in that area is also where Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. But yes, to be honest, I went out there at the time I did because I wanted to be there after dark, because Gettysburg is one of the most haunted spots in America because tens of thousands of people died on that battlefield suddenly. So it's kind of expected that you might have a few spirits wandering around. And yeah, it's literally like they were just like, here's a guy. There's some that are buried according to state. And so basically what it is, like there was one that was Michigan and it was 400 bodies. So at least they had the state, but a lot of it was just unknown. It was like, here's some bodies, there you go. So I'm out there. It starts to get cold. I mean, we're talking mid 40s. And I was out there after dark. All the other cars that had been out there to tour the battlefield were gone. So it was me by myself. And then I realized I had to walk a mile back to my car with my phone that was dead. So I had no battery. I kept checking it. You ever have that where if your phone dies, if you shut it off long enough, if you turn it on, it'll suddenly be all right again? Maybe it was just my crappy old, I think it was an iPhone 6 that I had, because I had to walk back in the dark. And you're going through those woods again, and I'm hearing the crinkling leaves again, and I'm like, remember, it was just deer. It was deer before, because now it's after dark, so I'm expecting to see some sort of floating orb coming at me from the side of the woods. I managed to take one 15-second video for Instagram walking through an empty, dark parking lot, and I basically just said I'm walking through Gettysburg in the dark. And then my phone died again. But I was the last one to leave. Unless people went after for Supernatural. But Gettysburg was on my bucket list. So that got crossed off. Next week's podcast, episode 37, I'm in Hagerstown, Maryland. It's far less exciting because I literally went there, had dinner, went to sleep, and left. So I had to kind of fake it. I did my research because I wanted to make people care, but I hadn't been there. So it was a lot of, ooh, that sounds like it might have been fun if I went. But that's about it. So I do top 5 lists each week on the podcast. So this week, for episode 36, my top 5 was movies that gave me nightmares. And of course, one of them is covered by the photo. So the one that is covered by my screen right here is Hellraiser. So I should have known better that one of them would get covered. So these were 4 of my top 5. And they're legit, like Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I spent the night, my mother will remember, I spent the night at Brian's house when I was 8 or 9, and he had that poster, and he basically scared the hell out of me with it, to the point where I was like, I don't want to sleep over here. My mother had to walk. We were right around the corner. She had to walk in the dark to come get me because I was scared. Yeah, shameful. But these were the ones. Jaws obviously makes little kids scared to go in the water when you see the little boy get eaten right off his raft. And the fact that Jaws was filmed on the vineyard. So, Creepshow, that's a movie that if you haven't seen it, I guess they're doing like a reboot as a TV series now, which I don't get. But the original Creepshow was George Romero from Night of the Living Dead directed it, and Stephen King wrote some of it, and he's even in it. Oh, I tell you. Yeah, Jaws is a tough one. That's the only thing that's fun about it now is after I went to the vineyard and then watching Jaws to see all the places they filmed. That made it a little better. But I still won't jump off the Jaws bridge on the vineyard. But Creepshow, it was an anthology. I think it had four different episodes. And the first one, there was this mean old man that it was Father's Day, and he was complaining about not having a cake for Father's Day. So one of his kids killed him, and he came back to life as this zombie. And he was just like growling, "Where's my cake?" And it was dark, and he was stalking the kids. Oh my God, that scared the hell out of me. And then Stephen King, when he turns into the plant, I don't know if I'm spoiling anything. Yeah, see, there you go. Stephen King becomes a plant. He sees this meteorite and he gets like these seeds on him, and it grows and he becomes literally like a human patch of grass. And at the end, he's just all grass and he just blows his head off, which is lovely. And it's got Leslie Nielsen as a bad guy before he was in The Naked Gun, where Ted Danson and his girlfriend or whatever, they're buried up to their necks in sand on the beach for the tide to come in, and Leslie Nielsen leaves TVs right next to them so they can watch the other one drown. And it's like, oh my God, it's terrible. But yeah, so the funny thing is, and I say it on the podcast, I do top fives. There's only 4 here because the 5th one that you'll probably laugh at, but 5th movie that gave me nightmares as a kid was Pinocchio. Now, I'm a child of the 80s, so I was born in 77. So in the 80s, they re-released a lot of the 1940s and 50s Disney films, got re-released in theaters. And Pinocchio, the scene when the little boy gets turned into the donkey and his hands, the shadows, he turns into hooves. When I was 8 years old seeing that, it was terrifying. And it was funny because I'll do these when I researched the list, like movies that gave me nightmares. I sat and thought about them and I said, oh, Pinocchio really freaked me out. I'm like, I can't put Pinocchio in there with 4 other horror movies. But I ended up doing it anyway. I'm like, I'll share it. Yes, I mentioned that. What are they, like I don't know what they are. Xenobes or something is the name of the creatures on Hellraiser. Pinhead was always cool, but they had the one guy that had the glasses and he had the teeth and they were just chatter. That freaked the hell out of me. But yeah, that was fun. I think next week's podcast, the top 5 is defunct New England-based stores. That one was a lot of fun. So basically it's and the top 5s are not in any particular order. I just throw them out there. But they're the top 5 defunct New England-based stores. These were ones that were started in New England. So I listed all these stores from my childhood that are gone. And I'm like, oh, this one, like Woolworth. Woolworth wasn't based in New England. It was based in New York. So I'm like, oh, I can't use you. And the funny thing is, I was going to put Carvel ice cream in there, but they're still around. We had a Carvel on Cape Cod and Hyannis, And once it was gone, in my mind, I'm like, they don't exist anymore. But it's like, no, there's still some left. But that's coming next week. I don't want to spoil them, because then it's like, why would you listen? You already know. But that's coming next week, is episode 37. And I spoil it a little bit because you can kind of see, based on this title screen for next week's podcast, what's going to be part of it. That's my back in the day, I call it my retro segment. It's basically, I just called it, what the hell was Fotomat? I don't know if you're, I would say early 30s and before, you probably never had real interaction with a Fotomat, because they were basically dead by the early 90s. Oh, see, Fotomate. That's funny. When I was researching the history of it for the podcast next week, I saw that the Fotomates were the female people that worked there, and they were encouraged to wear short shorts, and I don't know what the hell that means. Like, basically, they wanted the female employees at Fotomat to wear really tight short shorts. Like, that's going to entice you to drop your film off there? Like, I don't get it. But I was reading stories about, yeah, basically, if you had to pee, you would, like, in that, well, you can't see it. Hold on, I got the actual photo on here. I kept the photo because I said, you never know. So, in the background there, I don't know where this is from, but it was a public domain photo, so I can't get copyright strikes. But you would basically lock it up and walk back to the, if it was a mall or a strip mall or something, and use the bathroom. But I was reading these message boards about people that worked at Fotomat, and I guess there were stories about people driving into them, not intentionally, but like if it's a packed parking lot and you're not expecting this toll booth sized building to be in the way, that people would smash into it. So I wish there were videos of that. But it's funny. I remember them. We had one in South Yarmouth. So if anyone's from Cape Cod, there's the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and Job Lot and Shaw's is on the other side. But that parking lot had a Fotomat in it, and I remember that. See, my mother just said it too. It is. That's where it was. I can't find any photos of that one, but they have commercials on YouTube, though. You can find them, it's wild because they've been basically out of business for 30 years, just about 30 years, but I can still close my eyes and see those buildings. And some of them are still around in that they've been repurposed, like they're either coffee shops, or I saw one was they repaired watches there, and others, they sell like cigarettes and lottery tickets. But yeah, so Fotomat is coming next week as part of episode 37. And then after that, episode 38 might be my one I'm most excited about so far. It's the 30th anniversary of Nirvana's Nevermind album. And the podcast itself is going to drop the day before it would have been released. And those of you that know me, that album basically changed the whole trajectory of my life. Literally, this live stream wouldn't exist without that album. And not that I was listening to bad music or anything. It's just that this music spoke to me. Because Kurt Cobain was Generation X. He was, I think 10 years older than me, so be like an older brother. But he had that teenage angst. I was 13, almost 14 when I first heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I was in the bedroom of one of my oldest friends, Matt Medeiros. Episode 30, I talk about him, and I mention that moment, but I don't go too deep into it because I wanted to share it here. And literally, he had one of those like digital clock radios with the little dial, and he turned his radio on, and it was on Pixie 103, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was playing, and it was literally like one of those, there should have been a narrator for my life, where it was like, I knew my life would never be the same. It'd be like on the Wonder Years, That would be like Daniel Stern would just narrate that part of my life. And everything changed. I found basically my identity through the music and the whole all-encompassing grunge scene, Generation X identity, like the movie Singles, and all these things. It all came together. And so this episode in 2 weeks is a bonus episode. Every fourth episode is a shorter bonus one. It has to do with the minutes I'm allowed on my podcast plan that I have. So I usually have 25 minutes or so that are left over, and I end up doing a shorter episode that's one topic. And I said, oh my God, Nirvana's Nevermind, and it all lined up. So I'm excited about that, to dive more into the album and the band and kind of the legacy and what it meant to, people like me and my age and my friend group. I mean, God, my senior photo at high school, I had torn jeans and a red flannel shirt on. Now, granted, you can only see me from like here up, so you see the collar. I'll pull that photo out maybe I'll do it for next week's live stream so you can see it and laugh. But yeah, torn jeans and flannel. That's the first station I created on Pandora too, in 2008. Oh God, I wish I was a youngster still. I mean, granted, I suppose I have clients I train at my job at a chiropractor's office. I have a couple clients that are around 80, and I guess to them I'm seen as young. Plus, the whole fact that if I have no hair and I keep my beard manageable, I look younger than I am. If I let my hair grow and I let this beard grow, then I'm all of 43. That's like for sure. And it doesn't hurt that I've been running more. So like being out in the sun, I have more color. Like I can see it looking, I'm like, ooh, not too bad. But I'm freshly shaved head. That's because I don't like my hair. My mother hates it, but it is what it is. I've been like this now for over 11 years, basically. Just like every week, my shears just. But yeah, that's coming in 2 weeks. The bonus episode. And I've already got I'm lining the episodes up, and I'm just really excited for, like, next week's one. I talk about when I wrote for the Travel Channel back in 2014. Then episode 39, I'm going to talk about training for and running a marathon, because I said, God, I haven't talked about that. See my shaved head, Mom? Yeah. I love it. I was showing people at my new job pictures of me from 2 years ago when I grew it out and I had it long and I looked like Gordon Ramsay, and they're like, you actually have hair? And I'm like, yup. People get mad at me. Like, I've got friends that get mad. Like, people would kill to have hair like you, ones that have gone bald. And I'm like, sorry. This is just if I had straight blonde hair like I did when I was a little kid, I'd grow it. So I don't know what everyone thought about yesterday's rain. Did you see that rain? Whew. I literally went to work at the chiropractor's office. My shoes, which I can see them from here, my work sneakers, they were soaked going into the office. So I had to work in the gym in my socks because I didn't want to ruin the floor with my wet shoes. So I'm training people in my socks, and I'm like, God, if they drop something on my foot, it's over. But literally, see, there you go. I'll take a picture with Serpa's hair over my head so it'll look like I have hair. Oh, you know what? So this is a funny thing. Anyone who's not family is going to like not get this reference at all. But I thought of this, I think it was when I was walking out to Race Point Lighthouse, and I was thinking of the people that have like childhood photos and then they recreate them when they're older. And I thought about, so you remember, I'll have to show it to you, Serpa, when we took the picture, you and me with Kaylee when she was like a couple weeks old and she was on the blanket and we're both on either side of her. I was thinking we got to recreate that photo with her now. That would just be so funny. And obviously she doesn't have to be like in a diaper, but still. I mean, that would just be so funny. 22 years later, we could just be sitting there on the blanket. Tell me that wouldn't be great. Kate would love it. And then I could have like trying to think of other photos from childhood, not ones in the bathtub. Like those, forget it. Those are lost to history forever. But like that one of Kaylee would be hilarious. I'm just throwing that out there. So I'll go through my photos and try to find ones that could be remade as adults. I mean, there's one of me and Kaylee and Emma where I'm sitting with them both. That would be pretty good. I think they were like 6 and 4, maybe. We're at Elizabeth Lane, so they must have been 6 and 4, 7 and 5. But yeah, all those photos would be so funny to recreate. I thought of the one. I have it in the box in my closet. But yeah, that's where my mind went. I was basically like meditating when I went out to Race Point Light, just like thinking and thinking. Hi, Aaron. I see you pop in. So this weekend is kind of big for two different things. So obviously tomorrow is the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. And I wrote something for it that I'm going to put on my blog tomorrow. So I know I was just about to say that if you're not family, and I feel bad because it's sometimes all the family pops in and I'm like, while you're here, let me bring something up to you. Aw, Sylvie, do I have any photos of her that'll pop the crowd as I scroll through? This part here is like it's not quite dead air as I scroll through my photos that you can't. There we go. No, that one's not good. So I'm scrolling through photos to find a picture here. Oh, that's a good one. With my stupid face covered up. Just like do that. That was when I was rubbing the balloon on my head and sticking it to Sylvie's shirt because she didn't know the static electricity thing. So I was just laughing because I was making the balloon stick to her. That's my youngest niece, by the way. She always gets shout outs on the podcast because going through, so we're all family here, like my mother said. So on Sunday, I'm going to pass 1 year of no drinking, no alcohol. So my 1 year soberversary, as Ashley would say. And I say on the podcast all the time to take care of your own mental health. And, oh yeah, you're absolutely, if you're here, these are very, like I share a lot of stuff on here. But I say on the podcast to lean into things that make you happy. And I always give shout outs to that little one right there because I make it a point if I'm tired after work or, you know, whatever, spending a little time with her. It's just like, it gives good vibes. And so she always gets a shout out. She was the last podcast of 2020. I gave her my 2020 MVP award. I'll have to do that for this year too. The podcasts that I do, they're organized in a way that I have usually a main story, top 5 list, this week in history, a road trip segment, and a retro segment. And they're stitched together like a quilt. My mother makes quilts. My podcasts are my quilt. They're also my kids because I don't have any. So I try to make them all encompassing where if you don't like history, maybe you like retro. If you don't like retro, maybe you like something more lifestyle or so. I don't do too many deep topics because I don't want, every week to be something serious or depressing or like if the conversation lends to it, I will. Like I did a whole episode about my oldest childhood friend who passed away a few years ago. So that was pretty deep. But for the most part, I try to keep it light and fun, like it's a breeze to get through. They're all basically 45 to 50 minutes. And oh, thank you. It was something where I had from the beginning of 2019, my grandfather, who basically is my role model for who I am in life. And so that photo there, that's his compass. I brought it out to Race Point Light with me, and because it's like a good luck charm, and it's cool. It's a cool kind of scene that ties it all together. And when he got really sick with Alzheimer's and passed away, it's like you self-medicate as however you can. And it became, I'll have a drink, to then I'll have several, to then I'll have several every day of the week for months and months and months. And that's when you're in your 40s, it's not cool anymore. If that makes sense. Not that it would be cool to just drink all the time in your 30s either, but it's like a gene. It runs in my family, especially on my father's side. And I never had an issue with it until I turned 40. And then all of a sudden it was like, hey, remember that gene that's part of your DNA? Well, now we're going to turn the switch on and let's see how fun you do. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's rough. And the worst part about it for me was I like to talk to my grandfather about the old days. And I was taught I worked in a retirement home that's how you redirect them. But I didn't know. So basically, if I go over and see my grandfather and I'm like, tell me about the 50s and 60s, it's like he's lucid and he's there. And so I had no idea how bad he was, which made it worse for me because it's like, I don't know what you guys are seeing. He's normal. And then it's like, oh my God, no. So you just self-medicate. And so it was almost every day from basically March of 2019 through August of 2020. Let's drink all the time. And I would always say, gonna go have a drink and watch the sunset. And it's like, I see those memories pop up on Facebook and I'm like, oh my God, it was all the time. And so it just got to a point where I didn't want to become that. Where suddenly you become like a cautionary tale, especially I've got 6 nieces and nephews ranging from 2 to 22. They may not be my kids, but I've been tight with all of them growing up. And I think of it as, I don't want to be the one that the parents point to and say, don't be like him. You want to be different. And so that, I might have been thinking too much, but it's enough. Whatever it takes to galvanize you to make that change, you just do it. And so that's Sunday. I don't even know if I'm going to do anything for it, but it's important. And it's like one of those. Well, so now all my sisters are in the chat. Boy, you're lucky I'm long-winded today, Lulu. I was just talking about all the kids. All of them. So, yeah, so that's my 1 year soberversary. But dialing it back to what I was saying at the start. So episode 36, if you've never checked out a podcast, they're everywhere you get them. Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, all of them. And I've got 36 episodes that are done. 37 is already uploaded for next week. 38 I'll record sometime in the next week. And you never know. Sometimes I'll get these bursts where people will download one and all of a sudden I'll see they download all of them in a row. And that makes me feel good. It's like they hit one and they're like, oh, this guy's pretty good. Let's just download all of them. And I hit on all kinds of New England-centric stuff just to make it, if you're from here, like I do a lot. I'm trying to think of my most downloaded episode is episode 2, which I talk about Billingsgate Island, which no longer exists, but I call it Cape Cod's Atlantis, which was my college thesis paper was about it. And that got me into Cape Cod history, was Billingsgate Island. Even if you don't listen to the podcast, look up Billingsgate Island Wellfleet. It's fascinating. It was literally like a thriving community, and erosion washed it all away. But I talk about all kinds of random stuff. Thank you, Serpa. I appreciate it. It's been a long 2.5 years. And it's weird because now I've gotten back into running thanks to my new boss, the chiropractor. And it's like I'm starting to feel like, ooh, I remember this guy. Like starting to drop my COVID weight. And so, love you too. And I'm doing, all that. Oh, no kidding. All right. I'm trying to think of anything I've talked about. Like I do my 4K New England videos on YouTube. I've done like Situate Lighthouse. I did the Plymouth Waterfront. I did Gurnet Point because my buddy Steve has a house out there. His family does. But they're like my children, where I have so much fun putting them together. Like I just put together the itinerary for episode 39, and I'm so excited about it. I'm like, ooh, the retro segment is going to be about being a Patriots fan in the 1980s because I used to go to games. So I get to talk about what a joke the team was when I was a kid. Where it's like, you're a Patriots fan? Ugh. And now it's almost the same, except people are mad because they're successful. But yeah. So that's all the fun stuff from this week. It's funny, I'm in this kind of extra side room. There's a window right in front of me, and it's usually always open, but because of the rain, I had it shut. So I'm not used to not hearing cars going by. But yeah. So obviously, thank you all for tuning in to this week's live stream. Glad you all came back after I was burned out all the hell last week and I had to go walk to Race Point Light and stuff like that. And so I'll be back next week. Check out the podcast, episode 36, wherever you get it. Let me know what you think. And, have a great weekend. It's going to be amazing. I cannot wait. This weekend, both days are going to be great. Maybe I'll run. Maybe I'll end up staying inside and writing, but it'll be fun. Thank you, Beer Can Museum. Thank you so much for joining in. It's always a lot of family in here, and it's a fun time. But I put it up on IGTV, YouTube, coming up after. So thank you all for tuning in. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again soon.